Sheriff Finch,
Here.
Commissioner Lavra,
Here.
Commissioner Yanusak,
Here.
Commissioner Zelinski,
Here.
Commissioner Chatters,
Here.
Commissioner Ballard,
Here.
Commissioner Atkins.
Here.
Thank you.
To those of you joining us remotely, please mute your microphone, or if you are calling in, mute your phone by pressing *6. After each of our action or discussion items, I may ask for public comments. If you are participating remotely and would like to provide public comments, unmute your microphone, or if you are calling in, unmute your phone by pressing *6. After you provide comment, please mute your microphone or phone. Agenda item 2, approval of the minutes.
I'd like to move that we approve the minutes from December 6th.
Thank you, Commissioner Chatters. Do I have a second?
I'll second that motion.
Thank you, Commissioner Zelinski. Kathy?
Commissioner Atkins,
Yes.
Commissioner Ballard,
Yes.
Commissioner Chatters,
Yes.
Commissioner Zelinski,
Yes.
Commissioner Yanusak,
Yes.
Commissioner Lavra,
Abstain.
Chair Finch.
Yes. All right, next up, reports of members and committees. Not aware of any committees, but I welcome reports of commissioners. I'm happy to report that a number of the planning commissioners went on a tour of a few of the Everett Housing Authority projects this last weekend in relationship to their upcoming plan project of the Park District is what they're calling it. And I thought that was well attended. It was great to see you all on a weekend and in a venue that wasn't here. So thanks for attending. Staff comments.
Good evening, Commissioners. York Stevens Wajda, Planning Director for the city. I want to start off by recognizing Commissioner Lavra. This is your last meeting. By my count, you've been on the Planning Commission for a full term, which is actually relatively rare to have started on the first day of a term and ended on the last day of a term. And in between there, I counted up about 82 meetings, and to hear Kathy tell it, you were here consistently and effectively for just about all of those 82 meetings. I don't want to think about how many hours that is, nor how many pages of packet that you had to read, but the city is in your debt for the time that you've given to this commission and to the work that is generously in the service of the city and the residents, both current and future. So I wanted to express my thanks on behalf of staff and on behalf of the city, and I'm sure the commissioners join me in appreciating you for the time that you've served on this. A couple of the things that have been worked on by the Planning Commission and yourself during this term included big projects like Metro Everett. We have rethought housing, we have rethought zoning, we have updated the Shoreline Master Program, we have updated the critical areas regulations, done a number of annual amendments to the comprehensive plan, and lots of different code amendments, much like the one that we're working on this evening. I wonder if you remember on your first meeting in January of 2017, what was on the agenda that day?
Sorry, no, I don't.
It was accessory dwelling units.
Oh, really? Wow. It does feel as though we've talked about it a lot.
That's right. So 6 years ago today, the commission adopted amendments that added for the first time the possibility of detached accessory dwelling units after spending about 4 or 5 meetings in the preceding year working on it. So there's a lot of parallels here. We've gotten to see 6 years of how that has worked in the city, and now we're on to revise it again, as is kind of the circle of life when it comes to the planning process. So again, I just wanted to thank you for your time and your service, and we hope that your next endeavors are rewarding and enriching, and hopefully we see you around these chambers one way or the other. So thank you.
Thank you, and you may see me coming to comment.
Absolutely, absolutely. And you only have to be off the commission for a year before you can come back too.
Well, you've got a great commission here right now.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Does anybody else have any words? Otherwise, I have a few more updates. Okay, great. Well, thank you, Commissioner.
I would just like to say thank you for your service. It's been fun being up here with you and learning from you, and I hope to see you again. And a year's time.
Yeah, I know, thank you.
I almost forgot, we have a plaque for you, and if the commission can hang out for just a moment when we're done. Thank you very much. Like I said, it's a volunteer position out of the, of the graciousness of yourself. Well, absolutely.
You're very kind.
Well, thank you. The rest of my comments are not nearly as interesting or touching, but thanks for those of you who are able to join us on the Everett Housing Authority tour on this Saturday. I got a good feel for the neighborhood. I learned a lot about the Housing Authority's mission and some of their projects, and also some of the complicated finances and work with the federal government that goes on behind it. I still have much more to learn about that piece of their work, but I think it gave me a good context for the site and for the neighborhood that'll be helpful as we continue to work on the redevelopment project at Baker Heights. There's been a draft of what's called the HO5 report. The countywide planning policies have a policy in the housing chapter number 5, HO for housing, 5 for policy 5, that calls for a report to be prepared on housing characteristics and needs, and it's kind of the foundational report that feeds into the comprehensive plan housing element work. It has information about housing price and affordability, capacity, supply, recent development, displacement, and a variety of other information. It's about 150 pages thick before you get into another couple hundred pages worth of appendices. It's a really important document. I considered giving you all copies of the draft, but I thought it'd be nicer than that. If anybody is interested, I'd be happy to share the draft. We're going to be discussing it with the Planning Advisory Committee of Snohomish County tomorrow, this coming Thursday. I learned a lot through all of it. I think one piece of data stands out because of the challenge that it's going to bring to our upcoming work on the comprehensive plan, and that is the number of housing units that we're going to need to accommodate. So we've talked in the past during our scoping process and some other meetings on the comprehensive plan about the significant growth that we need to plan for in this comprehensive plan update. It's a 24% or so of the county's growth, which itself is expected to be significant over that planning period. The number of housing units we need to plan for is a function of population, vacancy rate, and average household size. Average household size is decreasing in general throughout the country and within the city and within the county as well, and that's projected to continue as we have generally smaller households. That hits Everett particularly hard for a couple of reasons, and there's some things within that I'd like to push back on a little bit, and not just because of the impact of it, but because I think it's important that we are planning for a diverse, family-friendly city that accommodates a variety of household sizes. But in this case, with some of the data that goes into it, the net result is that the number of housing units that we need to plan for just got even bigger. I think I'd been using the rule of thumb of about 30,000 housing units that we need to plan for, which is an enormous amount for this city. And I think the number that I saw in this draft was up to like 37,000. So there are some things that I don't agree with in that. I do agree that household sizes in general are going to be declining, but my hope at least is that that doesn't necessarily mean that Everett's household size is going to drop even more just because of the mix of unit types that we will have. So our capacity is almost all in larger structures, multifamily units, which tend to have smaller household sizes now. But my goal is that that mix of units kind of shifts with the times, and that we can put some policies in place and incentives, if that's what needs to be, to encourage a variety of housing sizes, which will attract a variety of family sizes and non-family sizes and everything. So that was one little piece that stuck out to me, but there's a whole lot more data in there. I will make it available via email to all of you if you want to peruse some of the data that's in there. It's very interesting. And I will keep you up to date on how those discussions go at the countywide level. And you'll definitely get a copy of the final report when it's done. And I'll stop there. As always, any questions for me, I'd be happy to take. Okay.
Okay, next is open public comment for items not on the agenda this evening. Kathy, anybody calling in who wants to speak on an item not on the agenda?
I have 3 guests tonight. I have 3 guests tonight. If you would like to speak during open public comment, if you could unmute. I do have one unmuted at extension 1837. Would you like to provide some testimony tonight?
Okay,
Not hearing
thank you.
anything.
I think we'll move on to the presentation on accessory dwelling unit code amendments.
I'll run the slides. If Becky, you want to lead us off?
Can everybody hear me okay? Great, thank you. Well, good evening, Commissioners. We're here tonight for the public hearing on the ADU code amendments that we've been discussing throughout the year. And so we'll go through a little bit of history, remind ourselves of the policy basis for the amendments, and provide you an update on some of the remaining questions that you talked about at your last meeting, and then listen to public testimony. Excuse me. So again, the policy guidance that we're working from is found in state law, multi-county planning policies, as well as the PSRC regional housing strategy. State law encourages cities to increase their residential building capacity, and in addition, both the multi-county planning policies and the regional housing strategy call for affordable housing, for housing choices in single-family neighborhoods. And then getting down to a little more local level, the policies in the countywide planning policies also support that housing variety in the community. Our growth targets and buildable lands that shows the city does have a shortfall in capacity to meet our 2035 growth targets. And then, of course, the Everett comprehensive plan policies also support that housing variety and affordability. So most recently, the Planning Commission and the City Council reviewed the Housing Action Plan, and the Council did approve that plan. There's a specific strategy around accessory dwelling units that asks us to take a look at the regulations and making it more easy to develop accessory dwelling units. They're a great way to provide infill housing and can be affordable, and potentially there could be some home ownership opportunities there as well. So the Housing Action Plan was specific about trying to remove the owner occupancy requirement from the code, as well as maybe taking a look at a program that would have some basic ADU plans that property owner could take and revise for their own property, and we could make it at a no or low cost. Thinking about whether or not it would be appropriate to waive some more lot coverage restrictions for ADUs, and then whether or not fee waivers would be appropriate. Also in that directive is a requirement to go and talk to the folks that build these units and get some feedback from them, which we were able to do through our process. Just a reminder of the conversations that the commission had. We talked about it in March, early March. We talked again about the policy basis, and then we put forward some potential code amendments, concepts. So we took your feedback there. We brought back an actual proposal or a draft of a code in October. And we also introduced our accessory dwelling unit dashboard that is now online, kind of tracking what the what development's happening in the community for accessory dwelling units. Excuse me. And then last week, we gave you a briefing on a proposal to change the code, and some of the remaining issues that you discussed were around the parking and the unit segregation issue. Excuse me. Next slide. So this is a reminder of what the proposal is before you. It is to simplify the definition, and what that means is that there's a definition for accessory dwelling unit, and it doesn't matter if it's attached or detached. It encompasses the whole thing. We are proposing to remove the minimum density calculation that was spelled out for the UR4 zone. Proposing to remove the owner occupancy requirement. We are proposing also to remove the restriction on ownership segregation, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a few minutes from the principal dwelling. The proposal also would allow up to 2 per lot, 2 dwelling units. And then we simplified the maximum square footage to be 1,000 square feet, where formerly there was a few ways to calculate what your maximum size would be for the dwelling unit. And then also to remove the design standards. So some of these, again, we worked through the commission with and made some changes, and so the proposal before you is based on all of these conversations. Next would be to remove the option for being able to modify any of the requirements. So previously there was an opportunity to modify, but if the proposal stands, the amendments would eliminate those requirements that could be modified or should be modified, and therefore wouldn't need to go through a modification process. So that option would be eliminated. Rear setbacks for non-alley lots had a kind of a calculation related to height. The proposal is just to set it for an ADU at 5 feet from the rear property line. For heights, again, there were some calculations that went along with this. For alley lots, though, we're proposing the maximum height of 28 feet, which is the maximum height in most single-family zones of any structure. For non-alley lots, being backed up against a neighbor, now it's my turn to cough. We're proposing non-alley lots at 24 feet, so a little bit of a relief with the 4 feet there. Then the proposal does talk about removing all conditions for allowing a parking requirement, and then adding back, and this is where the commission's had a number of conversations, and I've got a slide on that as well. But the current proposal would be, can you take that last bullet?
Well, we have a whole slide on the parking thing, but we've revised the proposal on the parking to where staff felt a good middle ground was, given all the conversation that we've had, that parking would be automatically exempted if the property is within a half-mile walking distance of all transit stop with all-day transit, defined as at least 1 trip an hour, 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. weekdays, and there's a map of where that would be in your packets, and I think we've got it on potentially the next slide. Before we move along, sorry, I was outside coughing at the end of the last slide. Did we pause for questions or anything about we feel like we've discussed most of these things in earlier meetings, but if there's any lingering questions, and not to say we can't return to this at the end of the presentation also, but
Did I hear you say you're going to talk a little more about the parking?
yes, yeah, we're gonna talk about parking,
Okay.
ownership segregation.
Okay.
I think those two main
Okay.
points. Okay. And the zones allowed, no change proposed here. The zones in which accessory dwelling units will be permitted are all of them except for mixed urban and heavy industrial. We had a prior comment letter wondering why mixed urban was not on the list, and I think the reason for that is that we're generally expecting more intensive development in accessory dwelling units. There are some houses and duplexes in the mixed urban zone, but they're relatively rare. I think there was 30 or 40 or so, which is, I think there's 25,000 parcels in the city, so it's kind of an edge case. But we appreciated the comment and looking into it a little bit further. We still don't expect, even though it's permitted in the UR4 zone, the neighborhood business zone, we're not expecting to see a lot of them there because most of the time an accessory dwelling unit is going to make sense as part of a house, duplex, and those smaller scale.
Can you please remind me why they are permitted in the light industrial zones?
That would be because we have, it's the, why the difference from the mixed urban zone, I can't answer very well, but there are houses and there are some areas in the light industrial zone where you could add an accessory dwelling unit. I'm not sure that less focus for growth, I guess, in light industrial, and why that one allows it for the kind of houses, non-conforming houses that exist in that zone compared to the mixed urban zone, which is otherwise similar. Light industrial, there's not many houses there either, so I would not expect to see many of them there. So I think the idea is to discourage the continuing small-scale development in the mixed urban zone, but in the light industrial zone, maybe less of a policy focus on discouraging that, but recognizing that it's still not going to happen very often. And all of this is pre-existing, so we did not propose it for change, but that doesn't mean that it's necessarily perfect. Okay, do you want to pick back up with part?
Right. Thank you. Okay, so we, again, talking about parking and our discussion with you at our last meeting, we had talked about whether or not to waive it altogether or to maintain some type of a distance within a transit stop. And so I think we actually landed on the waiving within 1/2 mile of walking distance. So that's walking distance. That means there needs to be a clear path up to being able to get to a bus stop. And that the transit stop would be one that has all-day service. So it functions as a frequent transit, which we defined as at least one trip per hour, weekdays 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. weekdays. And so we put some policy guidance here. There's a number of policies that support taking a look at the balance of parking, demand, and supply in the land use chapter of, no, that's a housing chapter of the comprehensive plan. And then again, you'll see there are 4 policies. Were spelled out in your memo from the transportation section that talk about parking, demand, and supply as well. In the Rethink Housing Action Plan, there was another strategy and action that said, take a look at your parking reductions and see where you might be able to employ those reductions, and think ahead in the future about how folks will use cars or will get around in the future when there is transit available within easy walking distance. And then the state legislation that we talked about before, which does prohibit cities from requiring that off-street parking when they're within a quarter mile of major transit stops. I think we talked about what the major transit stops mean, and that may not necessarily be the right metric for us to use. So the next slide just again shows you the routes that would qualify here, and with that, I will pause and see if there's any questions or more discussion on the parking.
Well, I guess, I know we had a pretty robust discussion about this at our last meeting, and I know when I was reading all through this, and I appreciate that staff took a look at it and where they landed, and I certainly don't think in my mind that the proposals by staff should not necessarily move forward. I guess I would just want to get it out there in case anybody else has, for some reason, I still feel a little bit, I guess, that this could be better. And I know it's all a matter of compromise, but I just want to throw out there for other commissioners too, in case that anyone else feels the same way. But I guess I'm still a little bit discomforted, I guess, by kind of even this compromise. It just seems maybe still a little bit overly restrictive, and I guess I would just really hate to see a suitable location that might be more than a half mile away from a transit not be allowed to go forward if simply because this were an issue. And I guess we don't know how likely that might be to happen, but particularly in a location where there would be adequate on-street parking. So that's just kind of, I guess, what I'm feeling still a little bit unsatisfied with it.
Commissioner Lark, freshly in, already a comment?
Already very excited to jump right in. My apologies for being late. I guess then, in that sense, like I feel like I'm pretty much up to speed already with some of the sense, and I guess then why don't we just remove the requirement altogether for parking? I mean, if they're like, not only is it talking about maybe not having them, maybe missing out on a good place, but maybe missing out on a family opportunity. Say there's a parent or a family wants to, create space for an extended family, multi-generational family on there. They're going to be using the same vehicle. Mom and dad who's moving to the same property as their kids to be with their grandkids are probably going to be able to catch a ride with the family members. The college student who is, moving back in over the summer, or the high school student who wants a bit of independence, they're probably going to be able to catch a ride with mom and dad. So if we're worried about the sentiment of missing an opportunity, then let's pull the requirement for parking altogether. No conditions whatsoever. And we can let people make the decisions as they lie.
I also agree with that. I think that renters are smart enough to see if a unit that they're potentially renting doesn't have adequate parking for their needs, that they would then proceed not to rent that unit. And I don't see any real good reasons beyond just assuming that renters don't know what's best for themselves to require parking, to require an off-street parking requirement for ADUs.
I want to echo Commissioner Yanosek and all of my fellow commissioners on this. I've spoken on this before. The two main reasons that communities have provided, based on the research I've done about ADUs, is they believe, A, it will lower their property value, and B, it will cause a parking problem in their neighborhood. And there is just not data that bears that out as the truth. And I understand that these are changes. These are things that we have not had in our code here before, and that is something that the community may have to process. But I think it's important that we make decisions that are really based on hard data, and the data does not tell us that ADUs lower property value, and the data does not tell us that ADUs create parking problems. And so in order to give property owners maximum use of their property, maximum ability to choose for themselves and their families what is best on their property, I think we should limit as many restrictions as possible, including the parking. Thank you.
Commissioner Ballard.
I'm not sure I can add any more, but I agree with the previous commissioners fully.
Commissioner Zelinski.
I must take a contrary position to my fellow commissioners here. I think that the compromise that the staff has come up with is a reasonable one, and I'm prepared to support that. I'm not prepared to support a complete elimination of the parking requirement. I think we can't. The data that's not there that Commissioner Chatters talks about, I'm not sure we have enough good data to draw a conclusion one way or the other about the impact of, the potential impact of higher density ADUs. I'm not sure if we have any examples where there is high density, relatively high density ADUs. They tend to be small in number and scattered. So in that kind of an environment, yeah, there's probably no parking impact. But that's not to say that that's going to be what we're going to be looking at in the future. So I think that the staff's suggested compromise is a good one, and I'm prepared to support that.
Thank you. I guess I will add a few comments. I think we were presented a study that concluded there were 0.9 stalls per ADU. And so I think that the staff's proposed compromise is interesting because in addition to relaxing the current parking standards, we're also doubling the amount of ADUs that are available. Once these parking standards are removed entirely, it's going to be very difficult to put that genie back in the bottle if there are problems. And so the staff proposal that we have is really proving out, it's a proof of concept proposal to see whether or not within a reasonable approximation of transit, are there parking problems? If there aren't, then one could say we could expand that and further remove the other parking restrictions. But this seems like a unique compromise and a test period that could be expanded further if it were successful. Yes.
Yeah, no, I don't want to be taken out of context from my earlier comment, but I don't know that I would necessarily say that getting rid of all of the parking requirement. What kind of occurred to my mind is I don't know that the prior, I guess I almost was wondering if there's some way to combine the existing exception with kind of the proposal, because it seems to me that the existing proposal does provide a mechanism as for there to be some individualized review of each circumstance, and for the planning director to make an exception where it's not going to be a problem. And so I was almost wondering, I mean, something I thought of that could potentially work would be something along the lines of taking the existing proposal, or the existing regulation, and in line 3, striking the and making it an or. So essentially that making an exception saying that you don't need to provide the parking if the property is not located in a residential parking permit zone, and the property has frontage on a public street, and there are at least 2 on-street parking spaces, or you're within a quarter or half mile of transit. That was just something that occurred to me as maybe a compromise, because I don't necessarily, I think it does sound reasonable, and given the public comment, I think that's a common public sentiment to not eliminate it entirely, but where it is appropriate, you require it, but where it's not needed, provide some mechanism for it, I guess for reason and common sense to be interjected in the process. So that's my comment.
I would say that's also consistent with the comment that Commissioner Zelinski made, I think it was at the last meeting. Please, go ahead.
Just one other comment I meant to make. Whatever amendments end up being eventually adopted by council with respect to parking, I would strongly suggest that we put in place some kind of a monitoring program so we can begin to actually see what, if any, impact there is. I mean, my own personal experience with ADUs, my wife and I added an ADU to our home 20 years ago, our original home. It was entirely within the unit, so there was no way you could tell there was an ADU there. We built that with the intent that one of our family members, elderly family members at that time, of which now I'm a member, might want that unit. It turned out nobody did, so we rented it out. We rented it out, we had 3 different young single tenants who occupied the unit, and they all had their own car. Now, there were no other accessory dwelling units on the block, so of course there was no parking issue. Just a little bit of personal experience on that. But the point is, if these ADUs become more popular than they've been, and hopefully they will be with more streamlined regulations, then we might start seeing some level of concentration within certain neighborhoods, and we would want to see what, if any, parking impact that has. So, as I say, whatever we end up adopting, or whatever council ends up adopting, I think it would behoove us to monitor that. Thank you.
Yes, I guess I was trying to think of it a different way on a compromise-wise. If there wasn't the will of the commission to reduce it 100%, that maybe we would look, instead of doing a quarter mile, that we go to a half mile.
I think that's what we're proposing.
Or even more. Again, it just seems, even that small area is just, it's very tight, so I didn't pick that up, so that's better, but.
Yeah, it is a half mile. I think that is the current proposal. And if we were in San Diego, I'd feel better about a mile. But given that it rains 10 months out of the year here, I think a half mile is probably, data would support that people aren't willing to walk much further than that.
Okay, we can,
Commissioner Lark again.
Just one closing thought. I mean, I think we kind of need, as we think about this, not compromising to the moment, but looking at our end state. I would make the argument that our end state should be that we need to have less than 40% or less than half of all trips in the city conducted by car. In the last half of the 20th century, we bet on the wrong horse when it came to transportation. We put all our money in on cars, and that just wasn't the right answer. We need a mobility mix. And as long as we continue to build parking stalls, we're always going to have structures and zoning that really requires mobility by cars. My wife just moved here from Seoul, never drove in her life. Didn't need to. Seoul has an excellent transit system. And, you know, if we don't have a good transit system, we have a transit system that doesn't have the level of service that Seoul does. And it's hard for her to get around. It's hard for me to get around too, because I am the sole source of mobility until her driving class is complete. We need to make sure that we're not engineering in the same old mistakes as we go forward. If we have an end state, if we know what our end state is going to be, where we have to have a better mixture of mobility for our community, let's be more aggressive. And if there is no appetite for that at the moment right now, because we're just physically not there, then let's put a cap on this. So we will a sunset on this. So we absolutely have to come back to this. Compromise is good, but we know that we know the direction we have to row. So, and if we're not at that moment right now, then let's engineer put it into legislation that we have to come back to it. Over. So,
And
sorry,
to be clear,
yeah.
this is not legislation. We're not legislating anything. This is a planning commission. Okay? Just to be absolutely clear. I think I think similar to your comment was Commissioner Zelinski's comment is it's important to look back and evaluate what is happening based on what we're advising that we move forward with today. Whether it's, elimination of all the parking requirements or relaxing. But I think it's important to have the data to make good decisions going forward. And it sounds like that's something we can all agree on.
I just want to clarify the data one more time. I think you mentioned, Becky, that it was approximately 1 additional car per every 6 blocks based on the study that we were provided. Is that correct?
That was the information that was provided in the AARP report.
Thank you.
just a couple of notes, and then when we get to the end of the presentation, we'll probably need to return to this issue and get towards a consensus, well, not necessarily consensus, although that would be great, but at least a vote moving forward. The Housing Action Plan also includes an action. It's a medium-term action, although the terms aren't necessarily set in stone, to conduct a parking study. As within staff, and I think as this discussion is borne out, There's a lot of interest in parking. It's very impactful. It is the number one reason I think that projects either don't get off the ground, either are not proposed or start their way down the permitting process and run into an insurmountable obstacle. They're one of the biggest semi-discretionary cost drivers. I think that came out from the housing authority as they were discussing what they were able to do, and one of the biggest limiting factors was parking, and that's more for larger structures where you need to go underground, and it adds $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 per unit when we're trying as hard as we can to drive those housing costs down. Then again, we need a transportation system. It's the public is very passionate about parking, and that's not something that we can ignore. So I will just offer that we need to look at this issue comprehensively sometime in the relatively near future. Could be part of the comprehensive plan update, because accessory dwelling units, we're not expecting to really change the game either for housing nor for parking supply and availability on the street. And it's actually a pretty good one to have this conversation around, because it's not going to make or break. But if you have a much larger development, that's the kind of thing that can have some pretty significant impacts, and we need to manage that transition from a city in a time where we are pretty auto-dependent right now to a future where that's just not really going to work. 37,000 housing units times 1, 2, 3 parking stalls. That's a vast amount of space and cost that we're just not going to be able to bear. So we're going to have to do something, and we'll get to the best place that we can with this recommendation and with this ordinance with accessory dwelling units, and take some of the lessons learned into that broader conversation that we're going to need to have. Doesn't mean we need to give short shrift to this discussion, but this isn't going to be the end of it. I guess I'll stop there until we see, Commissioner Yanisak, I think that was a good idea. We have some concerns around numbers 2 and 3, but I think it's an interesting idea and 4 for that matter, but we have it's an interesting idea to bring in that parking supply into the conversation, and I think that's something that we could entertain. Yeah, I think that was all I wanted to say. Moving on to ownership segregation.
So ownership segregation, as you recall, the proposal is to eliminate the prohibition from the unit being segregated from the principal, is it principal? Yes, I get principal and primary mixed up. Principal unit or lot. And so we took a look at what might be the processes for which you would go through to create an ownership opportunity for an accessory dwelling unit. It also, that the home ownership opportunities are supported in our current policies. In Housing 4.6.1, it talks about changing regulations to make it easier for home ownership. And in 4.6.2 and .4, it's really to invite, to create or provide incentives, again, for those ownership opportunities. So under the existing code and processes that are available to create ownership opportunities, we have about 3 here, which would be land divisions. So that'd be your short plat or it'd be your subdivision. There are a number of requirements that you would need to meet, such as when those become 2 separate lots, you've got to meet all of the requirements for a lot in that zone, including lot coverage, setbacks, those kinds of regulations. In the unit lot land divisions, you can have a smaller lot than what the zone requires, but there's all kinds of other requirements around that. And I can certainly ask Steve Inglesby if you have any questions about what that looks like, he can help answer that. And then there's the condominium conversion. That means that you can separate a unit from a principal lot or from a dwelling unit. The city doesn't review condominiums, it's really just a survey, and it has a number of common pieces to both units. So there's, setting forth how you access the property, if there's an access easement that needs to occur, if there's parking, specific parking places that you want to designate for each one. But it doesn't create a new lot. It doesn't create a fee simple lot that the city would recognize as a separate lot. It's just a separate ownership in the unit with some common use of other pieces of the primary or principal lot. We think it's probably more likely that there's more barriers that exist for fee simple land division, and that condominium process will likely be the path forward for unit ownership. So any questions regarding owner segregation?
Just a couple quick points of clarification, make sure I'm understanding everything. So fee simple, cutting off a piece of the land and cutting off a building and the ground underneath, condoization, just the built structure on top of the land, and then they pay a land fee to said owner or not, just depending on the contract of the agreement between the ground owner and the building owner. All right, Roger.
Condominium process is heavily regulated by state law, so it's very prescriptive as to what you need to have in place in order to condominiumize something on a lot.
And I'll just add that there can be different arrangements with the ground too. So you could split up the ground, just like a fee simple lot. You could split up just the walkway to the accessory dwelling unit or the principal unit. You could share, one parking spot between two of the units and have the other one reserved, so that there's almost the full variety of ways that you could split up the ownership and the maintenance responsibilities and all that.
Just another quick question, clarification. So with condoization, there's a lot of state level regulation, but if we wanted to do fee simple, we have way more discretion over that. And if we wanted to, we could make it abundantly easy, correct? Because there's less state level regulation or other entities regulating fee simple.
There are still state subdivision laws that we would have to comply with. I don't know what latitude we'd have to change our own procedures, which are what focus on it, or what we focus on in our review, but that's because those procedures were designed with the state subdivision laws in mind.
Thank you.
Can I just ask a clarifying question too? So in a situation where maybe someone builds a unit maybe on a non-alley lot where they're right up to the alley with no setback, am I correct in saying that if at some point they did want to try to seek a short plat or a land division, that at the very least would be a non-conforming use, because on a fee simple lot, the setback would be more than zero. So right off the bat, would that be a barrier to them being able to do that with that existing structure?
Well, on
Let
a
Steve
non-alley
answer.
lot, the setback is 5 feet.
I'm sorry, I'm in an alley lot. Yeah.
Steve Inglesby, Land Use Manager. Yeah, a short subdivision would not be possible because you wouldn't be meeting setbacks for the principal dwelling unit. So you'd have to go through the unit land division process.
Okay.
And that way we can deviate from lot areas and such things of that sort.
And I guess the reason I wanted to clarify that and ask it, because I got the impression of some of the written comments that we got, I think it appeared maybe there was a perception that what this might allow would be essentially for little mini cities to grow up in people's yards and for, to destroy these neighborhoods, but that would be really not something that I think would be a realistic risk
Right.
with this amendment here.
You still can't exceed the density limitations.
Right, okay, that's good.
So overall, and this was a complicated piece, but I think our discussion last 2 weeks ago, led us to put some pencils down and do a little bit more work around it. And just in general, what my impression was from it was positive, was that by removing this restriction that's in code now on ownership segregation, that would indeed provide significant opportunities to create new housing ownership opportunities. Most of those are overwhelmingly, I think, going to be through the condo process. There were significant barriers to the fee simple process for most of the lots that we have in Everett, and those included the minimum lot size, some of the setbacks, and actually parking, because if you if you subdivide off the accessory unit, it becomes a principal unit, and the current parking requirement for that is 2 or 3 spaces, and so just that alone would probably preclude it, but there's not much downside to going with the condo route, and so we expect that to be the most common one. But in general, I was pleased with what I learned through this process about the utility of ownership segregation with accessory dwelling units.
I do have one question. Relative to the condominium path, are you still in favor of allowing ADUs in the R4 zone? And given that it is our highest density residential zone, I can see a potential for us getting in our own way to facilitate more density going forward.
So the idea would be that by allowing an accessory dwelling unit, which then was condoed, that you would be more fixing that property versus if it were a rental unit.
Correct. That would be my concern.
I now share that concern. And on the similar subject, I was able to look up in the light industrial zone, there are no more than 20 single house or duplex structures.
And are new single-family structures permissible in the light industrial zone?
I think so. I wouldn't recommend it, but I think so.
Well, if they're not, then it would be an expansion of a non-conforming use, which I think that's not allowed.
We'll find out very, very, very soon here. Not permitted in the light industrial zone.
So it would seem we could remove light industrial as a potential for ADUs.
I think staff would support that.
Great.
Is it possible to see it, to pull that map up, just so I can see where the UR4 is?
I think that's, oh yes, we do have that one. I don't think this is connected to the internet, but in this one, the UR4 is the dark brown. And so you're mainly looking at, does the cursor show? You're mainly looking at the portion that is south of Pacific down to 41st between Rucker and Colby, kind of the frame of downtown, and then a little bit just north of the mixed urban zone. And then the Casino Road corridor, which is mainly larger scale development that we wouldn't see much in the way of accessory dwelling units. But certainly south-north, the whole frame of downtown is currently dominated by actually a mix of middle housing houses.
Currently, but
Currently.
these are
So-
also areas that are currently well-served by existing transit, and we anticipate being even better served by transit in the future. So to basically freeze these parcels now because of a $175,000 improvement, that's not getting us towards our goal of providing housing options.
I think that was an excellent point made by Commissioner Finch, like not getting on our own way. I think another way that we can also look at it is that there is perhaps too great of a scarcity of U4 in the city, that expanding U4 would allow more flexibility, because we're looking to accommodate growth. We're looking to accommodate the wealth and opportunity that comes with growth. So if we're worried about, again, I think the point Commissioner Finch made is very good, and we should heed it. But again, thinking in terms of we don't want to get in our own way, we're managing a scarce resource. Maybe we have the opportunity to create more abundance of this resource. So we should probably look into that as well.
You are going to enjoy 2023 then.
I enjoy every minute of this planning commission.
Oh, no, we're not going there again.
Yeah, so we're almost at the end of our presentation here, but I wanted to acknowledge that we had received, as of last night, 8 comment emails, and just, some of them were in favor. The majority of those were not in favor of ADUs in general. You have also since received, I think, 3 more that were forwarded to you today, and so definitely, we've taken a look at those comments, and I think as a result of one of them, at least, we've brought up a good issue, and we are taking a look at how we administer our code. I don't know if we want to speak to that specifically, but we take the public comments seriously, and again, we've taken a look at them as well. I think we are at the end of our presentation.
Thank you for the presentation. Commissioners, any questions on the presentation that have not been asked?
I just have one comment regarding ADUs. I think, they're they're an incomplete but very important part of the housing answer going forward. But there's still a challenge to build. Even if we remove all these land use restrictions and parking restrictions, we're still going to have a principal challenge of how does, say, a working family who needs to make a space for grandma and grandpa, or a working family who needs to have, wants to make sure they're using their property to generate more revenue, how do they do that? It's hard to finance these brass tacks. And I understand we're not a legislative body, it's getting outside of our wheelhouse, but we would be remiss if we didn't acknowledge the fact that as there is no public financing tool for ADUs, we are locking out an enormous component of the population, and we're locking out a very vital portion of the population. And these are tools that help families build wealth, that help families create stability and create opportunity. And so we need to make sure that it's accessible to all families here in our community. So I would just want to go on the record saying that any ADU plan that we have would be fundamentally incomplete if we do not have a low-interest public financing component to facilitate the construction of it for families across the city.
Any other comments? Okay, great. Okay, next we have, next I'd like a motion to open the public hearing.
I'll motion to open the public hearing.
Thank you, Commissioner Atkins.
I'll second that.
Thank you, Commissioner Chatters. We'll need to vote on opening the public hearing.
Commissioner Lark,
Yes.
Commissioner Ballard,
Yes.
Commissioner Chatters,
Yes.
Commissioner Zelinski,
Yes?
Commissioner Yanusak,
Yes.
Commissioner Lavra,
Yes.
Chair Finch.
Yes. So first, we will take public comments in person. I ask that all commenters, whether remote or in person, limit their comments to 3 minutes. Kathy, is there anyone here that would like to provide public comment?
Do you want to go to in-person first? And
In
then we
person
can
first,
go
please.
remotely? I haven't received any speaker sheets. Is there anybody here in the audience that would like to speak?
Great. Please come up and state your name and address.
Victoria Mason, 2527 Baker Avenue. Thank you. Did everyone hear that?
Yes, thank you.
I actually hadn't planned to speak tonight. I was just here to observe, but seeing all the comments that have been made are overwhelmingly negative. I wanted to provide some balance because I am in favor of these changes you're contemplating. I think the comments I read just on the fly here were very thoughtful and well-reasoned, but and my reasons for being in favor of it are probably not as well thought out, but I am a homeowner. and I've been interested in adding an ADU to my property. I'm kind of in the beginning stages of contemplating that and seeing what would be involved, not the least of which is financing. But my house is fairly large, it's historic, and I'm housing several of my family members. There's, I think, 5 or 6 of us now. I have my grown daughter, her husband, my grown son, and my granddaughter, who moved here to go to school. So we have an extended family situation. I also have a son who fishes 9 months out of the year, and when he comes, he stays with me. So we're very cozy. And but my son who fishes has proposed to me, Mom, let me help you build an ADU over the garage so that when I come home, I can stay there. And when I'm not there, you can rent it out, or, you know, I'm looking at it as a potential revenue stream because I hope to retire sometime soon. And even when my kids move on and move out, I'm going to probably be renting rooms in my house, you know, and so I would really like to be able to do this. And the kinds of changes you're proposing seems to me that it would help ease that process for me. So I'm very interested and very much in favor of the kinds of things that you're doing. I did also want to ask a question, and I don't know if it's appropriate for this venue or just to ask the permitting department. But my neighbor across the street is also a woman of my approximate age, and she also has some desire to build an ADU. And she said she was told, I think, by the permitting department that they were no longer allowing dwelling units to be built over garage spaces. And I thought, really? I mean, there's tons of those around here. So I don't know if you know anything about that, because that speaks directly to the parking issue as well. I mean, I was hoping to build a structure with 2 or 3 garage spaces under it. So does anyone here know anything about that, or was she misinformed, or?
We don't generally answer questions, but in this
Okay.
case, I think she could build there's no prohibition on living space above a garage.
Oh, okay. Thank you, I appreciate that. Anyway, that's what I came to say.
Thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
And I'll just offer to anybody else out there that has questions that if you go check out our website, we have a phone number and an email, and we have wonderful and responsive staff that can get back to folks with any questions that they have.
Thank you. Kat, any others who would like to provide public comment? Great, thank you. Kathy, are there any remote comment?
I do have 3 guests tonight. When I call your extension, if you'd like to speak, if you would unmute your mic. I have someone at extension 0007. If you'd like to speak tonight, please unmute. Thank you. Go ahead. They've unmuted. I can't hear you.
Perhaps we can come back to that caller.
Okay. Let's try another. Another caller I have is Mr. Koenig. Could you please unmute? Go ahead. Mr. Koenig, we can't hear you. How about the individual, the guest at extension 1837? Not sure. They've unmuted. So. Is she checking with Jeff?
In case this doesn't work out, I will say that we did receive Mr. Koenig's written comments and passed them along to the planning commission and appreciate
Yeah.
those.
Okay.
Okay, it seems to be working on our end, so I'm not sure.
If they're on their end, if they're.
So maybe we can
actually
give it
unmuted.
another try, Chair, after deliberations before taking a vote. Just give it one last shot.
I'm happy to. I think we'll need to close the public comment now and open it again. Is that right?
I suppose so.
Do I have a motion to close the public hearing?
I move to close the public hearing.
Second.
Great, thank you. Okay, next up is the motion 2204 on accessory dwelling units. This is the same motion that was in your packets. Oh, I'm sorry, yes, we do need a vote to close the meeting, Kathy. Sorry, the public hearing.
So moved.
Okay, Commissioner Atkins,
Aye.
Commissioner Ballard,
Yes.
Commissioner Chatters.
Yes.
Commissioner Zelinski,
Yes?
Commissioner Yanasak,
Yes.
Commissioner Lavra,
Yes.
Chair Finch.
Yes. Okay, all right, now we are on the Planning Commission motion, Resolution 2204. Sounded like there may be some open items relative to this current resolution based on the previous discussion.
Just to confirm, Chair Finch, the resolution is the language that is written on page 2 of the packet as proposed by the staff. There's been no amendments to the language, just discussion around it. Correct?
Can you restate your question, please?
I just want to confirm the language of the resolution is this language that we're adopting is on page 2 of the packet that was mailed out, the minimum off-street parking requirement for accessory dwelling units. Just want to,
I would look to attachment, Exhibit A
Exhibit A attachment.
would be the full language of all of the amendments to the development regulations. The resolution as written is Exhibit C, and so that has some recitals that give some explanation as to the intent. And then it refers to Exhibit A, and so the commission is welcome to amend, either add statements in the recitals or amend the proposal for your planning commission recommendation.
Yes.
It may be working right now. We can actually see. So we
Great.
can call
I would like to reopen the public hearing if it is working.
Second.
Thank you.
I'm not able to get in through.
Are you able
I'm
to get us?
unmuted.
Oh, good, good. Now we can hear you. So.
Oh,
let me-
you can't
We're
hear us
all
now?
here.
The three of us are having a conversation. 3 phone friends.
Well, let's take one at a time, and let's have the person at extension 0007 provide comments, and if you could provide your name and address for a record, thank you.
So, can you hear me, Kathy?
Yes, I can hear you.
Kathy,
Yes, we got
I
you.
can hear you.
hello? You mean Leanne and David can hear me, right? Or
Yes,
Kathy?
I hear you.
Okay, Kathy, this is Ismail Mohammed. And I have no comments. I just appreciate the work done by Planning Commission. Thank you.
Thank you. How about the guest at extension 1837?
Okay, that's me, and that's Leanne Rowe, and I'm at 6308 West Magnolia Avenue, Everett, Washington. And I did send in a, by email, written comments, but I didn't see it listed on the agenda for the Planning Commission. So I definitely hope it gets put into your agenda notes. What I would like to say is, I am firmly opposed to the proposed accessory dwelling unit unified development code amendment. I wish the city would put as much concern with the continued ongoing city park shortfall that has existed for many, many decades as they are with what they call the, quote, city 2035 housing capacity shortfall, end quote. By allowing the construction of houses to be built in backyards, we will have even less outdoor areas in which to provide for activities to benefit our minds, bodies, spirits, and overall well-being. Currently, there are at least 11 major housing projects under construction, bringing in over 1,500 new housing units. If this were occurring in a low-density community, it might not be so impactful. But this is being done in a city that has been fully established for a long time. We are one of the first major cities established in the Washington state. Our infrastructure is already overburdened. It is even making the local TV news on how our hospital, which in recent years was fully remodeled and increased in size, cannot meet the community's current needs. The hospital is turning away people who have, quote, significant threats to life or function, end quote, because there is no space. The police cannot keep up with the increasing number and growing degree of violence within the city of Everett. Police officers are even apologizing for not being able to handle it. The public schools and roads are beyond capacity. How do you create more space for schools and roads when there is no more space? The idea that someone would build a house in their backyard for someone they care for is a ruse in order to turn a residential area into a commercial area for rental units under reduced building requirements. It is a false narrative in order to end up doing something completely different. It has nothing to do with taking care of a family member. What it has to do with is creating a business model for builders, landlords, and rental agencies to make a profit at the expense of the neighborhood. By allowing this type of construction, they will be able to buy a property with a house on it, build 2 more houses in the backyard. It will be a windfall for builders, landlords, and rental agencies. If they can make a profit, they will do it over and over again. It is a cookie-cutter business model.
Ms. Rowe, if you could please
Yes.
conclude your comments. We do have your letter in the Planning Commission packet, so we have received your letter. If you could please conclude your comments.
Thank you very much. It will completely change the character of the neighborhood. You will never recognize what the neighborhood was before the crazy building deregulation occurred. Eventually, the city of Everett will become the city of tenants. And I really do appreciate your fixing the technology so you could hear us tonight. It was very helpful.
Thank you for your comments.
Thank you very much. Good night.
Thank you. We have one more guest. Mr. Koenig, would you like to speak?
Yes, the proposal before you to eliminate design standards is not supported by Everett's adopted policy documents. The city must develop design and zoning standards which comply with the adopted documents, including vision efforts, the Everett Housing Action Plan, and the Everett Comprehensive Plan. The Planning Commission should consider these documents and request staff to provide you with zoning and design standards that meet the adopted policy and studies the city has done. Citizens participated in developing these efforts and were under the understanding the city would follow through with design standards to protect and enhance neighborhoods as density and development increase. Under the Everett visioning, it said maintain and improve the quality of neighborhoods. Under the Everett Housing Action Plan, 1.4, update design guidelines for new development to ensure that new infill projects align with the neighborhood. The city should also design standards and guidelines for new development in R1 and R2 zones to reduce conflicts between old and new uses. This would require updates to the 2019 Everett Design Guidelines and provide more guidance for these infill projects. And I want to emphasize more guidance. And then there's an example actually in that document, figure 4, which I provided in the document, that shows examples of design standards for neighborhood character. Very specific, should not be ignored. Several recommendations goes on in this the Everett Housing Action Plan. The detail need to provide revisions to design guidelines and requirements to ensure that new development is consistent with existing neighborhood character and does not present significant conflicts with existing uses. Efforts to make these revisions to design guidelines should be coordinated with other different subject areas and implemented as part of the Uniform Development Code where possible. Under the Everett Comprehensive Plan, there's even more specific language where it says, allow attached and detached accessory dwelling units in single-family neighborhoods subject to specific development design and locational standards. That's policy 4.53. 4.51 is update standards for higher density types to protect and enhance the character of existing neighborhoods. And I'll point to one last policy, 4.54, encourage infill development on underutilized sites that have adequate urban services that the infill enhances and is incompatible with a nearby neighborhood and community. I'm not going to get into how many units and all that. I just think you need to have design standards. The way these are now, there are no standards. People could put in flat roof houses in areas where they're now slow through.
Mr. Koenig?
It's just, yes.
If you could please conclude your comments.
My final comment is do not move forward without having design standards. If you do, it's in conflict with what the community had the understanding and what the city has promised through its adopted policies. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Thank you, Kathy. All right, and thank you to all that submitted written testimony as well. If I could have a motion to close the public hearing.
I motion to close the public hearing.
Thank you. Great, thank you. And a vote?
Commissioner Lark?
Yes.
Commissioner Ballard?
Yes.
Commissioner Chatters?
Yes.
Commissioner Zelinski?
Yes?
Commissioner Yanasak?
Yes.
Commissioner Lavra?
Yes.
Chair Finch?
Yes. Okay. We're finally here.
Did it.
All right, now in front of you is Planning Commission Resolution 2204. I'd like any friendly amendments to this proposed resolution.
I'm not sure that I have an amendment, but I kind of like to support Commissioner Yanasek's idea about giving more latitude on waiving the parking, but not waiving all parking requirements. That's kind of, I think, would be reasonable.
I was thinking along the same lines. I was hoping maybe Commissioner Yanisek would agree to restate that.
Well, I guess I was just, and just a thought was that really just using the existing language, which provides a 4-point consideration for exceptions. Well, I guess actually as it's written here in Exhibit 2, I suppose that's pretty much what I was, with an or in Part 3, but maybe then with the half mile instead of the quarter mile. So I'm just looking at page 5 of the memo in the exceptions to off-street parking space requirements. It looks like the existing language, which here is indicated as being crossed out, but basically, I guess just leaving the existing language with, after the third point, that there are at least 2 adequate on-street parking spaces in front of the subject property, or number 4 being, transit located, existing language is a quarter mile, but perhaps expanding that to a half mile. I guess maybe I'm not sure what the existing language is. This is somewhat in conflict between what was listed here and what was in the memo.
Give me a moment, I will confirm. I thought there were ands all around. And. Yeah, the existing language has 3 ands.
So I guess what had occurred to me, and I hadn't thought it through entirely, but was just, I guess, making it as it's written here, which appears to be a typo. But as it's indicated on page 5 of the staff memo, or Exhibit A, I guess it is to the memo.
Yeah, that's a curious one. I have corrected my copy, so if we could accept that as the first friendly amendment to correct the strike-through third item under 1934-050, the existing language has 3 ands. Very curious.
So I see, on clarification, on 1935.050, I see 1 semicolon and, number 2 semicolon and it goes into the third and has an or. Are we just removing the 2 ands? I heard 3 ands.
Yes, the third one should not read or. Very curious how it got that way. It should read and that is language that we're proposing to strike, but still we should know what it says now.
So it should read and we're still being stricken. But
Correct.
we're correcting the back language.
Correct,
All right, but still is stricken.
so far.
Roger that. Correcting the record, yes, just wanted to. Yeah.
I'm still just not quite clear on the proposal. Maybe someone could help me understand what you were proposing, Commissioner Yanisek.
Well, I guess what I was proposing is if you go to page 5 on the Exhibit A to the memo, it's currently listed here, it has a cross,
The stricken language.
the stricken language.
Correct.
But basically just unstrike it, whatever, how, as it's written actually here, which we know is a typo from the current actual language. Maybe it's some sort of a Freudian slip or something here, but basically just not cross that language out, adopt that as the new language.
If I can just ask point of clarification, make sure I'm understanding. So the intent is that as long as one of those 4 criteria are met, the parking requirement can be waived.
Well, I think it would be as long as 1, 2, and 3 are met, or 4 is met.
Or 4 is met.
Yeah.
And we would adopt for number 4, we'd adopt the new language with the transit stops, with all-day service, all that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that would make sense.
Yeah, so what staff's thinking was, so looking at 4, the way it currently reads is located within a quarter mile with a safe walking path to a transit stop. We thought that a quarter mile was pretty close. That's a very short walk. That's like 4 minutes. That's like right around the corner kind of thing. That's to be a very tight area. A lot of the transit stops are on arterials where a quarter mile doesn't even get you to the back of Safeway, where the first potential property would be. So we were thinking a half mile was better. Using the walking path makes sense because that's real life, and if you can't get there, then you're not really a certain distance away. Public transit stop also includes a couple of the routes that were not highlighted in the exhibit in the packet and on the screen that are only commuter service one way. Thinking specifically of the, I can't remember which number it is, but it goes along Mukilteo Boulevard. At some point, that could probably turn into all-day service, probably will turn into all-day service, but for the time being, there's like 3 trips going one way in the morning and 3 trips coming back, so it'd be pretty tough to live on transit alone. So that's why we had at least the threshold of all-day transit. So those were the kind of 3 changes that we did to that number 4. With respect to the parking permit, I think looking to the parking permit zone makes sense. Whether it has frontage on a public street or is on an easement, which is 150 feet from a public street, it wasn't clear to me why that would make a difference with respect to parking. And then we've had difficulty in applying what 2 adequate on-street parking spaces in front of the subject property. Where does in front, and are they always there? Are they sometimes available? So those were some of the things that we thought through in coming through that. Although if you remember some of our discussion, we had been toying with the idea of looking at parking availability, but it wound up being a little bit difficult to judge.
Commissioner Ballard.
I would like to make a motion that we waive the parking.
Second.
I think, given that there are 3 that spoke out, I think it merits I wouldn't call it a full vote, but maybe a raise of hands. Please raise your hand if you're in favor of waiving all parking requirements. Okay, all right. Great.
Mr. Chair, I want to raise a quick point of order with respect to voting. We have all 7 of our regular members in attendance this evening, and so just for the formal votes, I think straw polls, discussion and everything, but for the formal votes, we should keep it to the regular members.
I think we're 1 short.
We actually are short 1 regular member.
Oh, you're right.
So I have to switch between the 2 alternates.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yes, got it.
So Becky, or sorry. Right, so Kathy will,
I've just been switching back and forth.
okay, so just so everybody understands, because this is a complicated system, we have 7 alternates? No, excuse me.
It feels like it sometimes.
We have 7 regular members, we have 2 alternates. The way that the system works under the bylaws, when there are less than all of the regular members in attendance, the alternates vote in their place. We currently have all but 1 regular members in attendance, so there's 1 alternate vote. Our practice has been to alternate votes between the 2 alternates. So thank you, Kathy was all over it. So I
Question
guess-
for the record, who is the voting alternate tonight, just to clarify?
I think Kathy alternates each vote.
It alternates each vote.
Maybe we should just put that, clarify each vote or for Chair Finch, just so he knows which one of us needs to be counted.
Yeah.
So I know when not to vote as well.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. And may I also see a raise of hands for those in favor of adopting the language as is? Okay, great. And finally, a raising of hands for adopting the language as modified by Commissioner Yanisek. Okay, all right, great. Any further discussion on this topic? All right, Kathy? This is where your knowledge is clutch.
I'm really
Are we
confused now.
supposed to vote on every friendly amendment, or is it 1 vote at the end to wrap it all up?
I would consider these not, an amendment, not necessarily to be a friendly amendment. This is not, this is a friendly atmosphere.
Feels
Don't get me wrong. I would suggest that if there's an amendment proposal, someone make a motion to amend the resolution or Exhibit A, and then that be voted on. If successful, then a motion could be made to adopt the amended resolution. Does that make sense?
It does, however, if there are multiple proposed amendments to the exhibit, should they be taken all at once?
Whoever makes the motion first.
Great, perfect.
Would take it in that order.
All right. Do I have a motion to amend the proposed resolution as written?
Point of order, we have a motion. Are you counting the straw poll as the vote on the motion that I put on the floor?
No, I'm sorry. I missed that. Thank you. Do I have a second to Commissioner Ballard's motion?
Second.
Thank you.
And
Kathy.
vote? I think it's Atkins' turn to vote, so. Commissioner Atkins?
Yes.
Commissioner Ballard?
Yes.
Commissioner Chatters?
Yes.
Commissioner Zelinski?
No.
Commissioner Yanusak?
No.
Commissioner Lavra?
No.
Chair Fitch?
No. Okay. That amendment has failed. Are there any other amendments proposed or any motions to advance the current resolution?
Commissioner Yanusak, are you going to propose an amendment to do what we were just talking about?
I can't, sure. Let me move to amend the proposal to add language, I guess how to say this, consistent with the existing language, but changing the current "and" after the third, after number 3 to an "or," and then amending the current language in number 4, or part 4, to include a half-mile walking distance from a major transit stop, or whatever the other the appropriate language is for that.
We could use the all-day,
Yeah, the all-day,
all-day service, at least one trip per hour, weekdays, 7 to 8 p.m.
yes. Does that make sense?
Can
And
I just clarify what you're saying? So you're saying that the language that is stricken, beginning with may be waived by the planning director when all the following circumstances apply, that language would be retained, and then the section that was added is waived for, the new section that we're discussing would be added as item 4 on the list, correct? Now, are you talking about changing the may be waived to is waived?
I guess that's a good question, because my understanding is that current state law says that you cannot prohibit it within a quarter mile.
It does, and let's take that as strong guidance because there's an exception for cities who substantially revised their accessory dwelling unit regulations within the 4 years before that bill, which we did. So we're not held to that legally, although we should probably take it as strong guidance.
I guess I don't know that I have a thought between may or is. I guess in some ways, I guess I would propose may to continue to allow there to be some extra discretion in those situations that maybe do present some challenges, or that common sense and the review of the planning department would indicate that it would be appropriate to place some limitations on that.
Well,
I would be more apt to support it if it did not say may.
might it be possible to actually, like, take the two apart in the sense of having the may for the 1, 2, and 3, and then having a is waived for properties that meet number 4?
I think you're on the right track there, Commissioner Atkins. I think one potential path forward would be that the minimum off-street parking requirement for an accessory dwelling unit is waived for properties within 1/2 mile walking distance of a transit stop or station with all-day service, at least one trip per hour, 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. weekdays, or the property is not located in a residential parking permit zone when time limits and the property has frontage on a public street, and there are at least 2 adequate on-street parking spaces in front of the subject property. I think that's what we're trying to say here.
Yeah, I concur.
If that is the motion on the floor, I'd like to second it.
I guess just because, does staff understand then, it's clear what that would be?
Well, who made the motion? Is that,
Well, I guess I moved
okay, Adam
I'll second.
to language, and I believe
and
got a
Chad.
couple
Commissioner
seconds.
Chatter's already seconded.
Chatter's second.
I think York is going to put the code up there and then amend it the way that you're
Could you
describing.
restate it?
I'm
I'll
happy
type
to.
it
So
first.
I think the current proposal is to adopt the language in the exhibits up to number 1. We'll stop there. This is EMC 1934050.
I don't know if this is.
Is
Waived.
waived, right?
Is waived.
That makes sense, yeah.
And,
And then was it-
or,
No,
It would be
Stop.
And then restate the first portion along with the first three, items 1 through 3, correct?
it would be, and for properties that are not located in a residential parking permit zone. And I believe it's supposed to be with time limits, not when time limits.
Is it a maybe for the first 1, 2, and 3, though? Not an is, but a maybe?
No, I think it is waived. I think the proposal is to
But I'd be fine either way, honestly, personally.
But I'm,
But I don't know what,
I am relying on Commissioner Lark to ensure that York has this correct, because I can't even pretend to read what's on the screen. Okay.
Is waived for properties within 1/2 mile walking distance of a transit stop or station with all day service at least and/or properties that are, and for properties that are not located in a residential parking permit zone, and the property has frontage on a public street, and there are at least 2 on-street parking spaces in front of the subject property.
I have 2 quick questions. I want to revisit, I think, a concern brought up by staff regarding number 3, which is there are at least 2 adequate on-street parking spaces in front of the subject property. Was there mention that it was hard to measure that?
The word adequate is not in the existing code. What's in the exhibit was a previous proposal. That's why it had those 2 words in there.
So
That's
there-
typo, so.
So there are at least 2 on-street parking spaces in front of the
for
subject
the-
property.
Correct. What's up on the screen there, number 3.
yeah, I took 1, 2, 3 from code. I'm so sorry about the typos.
Just a point of technicality, do we have a standard definition for the distance or size of a parking stall for on-street parking? Do we want to go to maybe hey, the building has this much frontage on the on-street parking? I mean, just in terms of like measurement and assessment, when making that call, is that language clear? Is it easy to do? If it's
Steve, you would be applying this?
True. It's fairly easy. We don't, if it's properties are typically going to be 50 feet wide, so you can easily fit the 2 spaces. Typically, a stall is 18 and a half feet. So if they don't have the entire, let's say it's a narrow lot, if you can generally get about 2 cars in front, we're good.
Roger, as
All
long,
right.
as long as it's easy for staff.
Right. And
Yeah.
to, and to that end, I'm wondering, you certainly don't want to get in a situation where you're arguing with with a property owner about whether or not this is a stall or not. Would it be better to use may and permissive language at that point so that ultimately staff could prevail on that without having further?
It should be, may should not be used. It should be either you can or you can't.
Okay.
Staff
Okay.
isn't going to be making that call.
Got it, okay.
We're generally just going to allow it.
Got it.
Yeah, if it's discretionary, we plead for criteria to help us with that decision, otherwise it's pretty open-ended. Worth noting that we're removing the option for modification here too, although I think that's probably the intent is to hold to this. Yeah,
Can you elaborate upon that really quick, York?
with current code, you can modify, and that includes parking, using a Rev 1.
Yeah, several parking standards can be modified. I'm not sure. I have to check code to see if this is modifiable.
Yeah. I'll back off on that comment with respect to this. We are removing the modification route, so if you don't meet any of the requirements in the ADU chapter, then you're out, and there's nothing that staff can do short of a variance with the way that we've set this up. Currently, there's a modification route, and so if you didn't meet the visually matching your neighbor, we could run it through a process by which we consider that modification of the development regulations against some criteria. We're proposing to basically streamline this into either you make it or you don't. And so I was just saying it's a little bit of a higher, what's that word?
Threshold?
Yeah, something like that. It's a bigger deal now. Consequences are a little bit higher when there's no way around it. But with the parking requirement, I think for one, that might be the intent, is that if you are not near a transit stop and you have 1 space in front of you, but not 2, then you have to put parking in there, period.
My one last question is, part of the question we had is we wanted to expand, ADU accessibility. We did the half-mile lot. After we looked and said, hey, the quarter mile, like, no one's eligible for this. I mean, how many units wouldn't fit this? Are we at like 90% to just waiving? Are we at 98, 99% to just waiving the parking requirements all in general?
Not 90%, but I'm gonna say half of the lots in the city are within a half-mile, maybe not quite that, of one of those transit stops. And it's a lot of them.
And property and frontage, and also meet the other 3 requirements too.
Was your map, I'm sorry, was your map earlier were you using yellow highlighter to highlight where the routes were? Or was that representational of the width? Okay.
It's probably pretty close to the width, though.
It's so narrow. Guess we just need more buses.
I believe that there was a motion on the floor that was seconded. I think we're now ready for a vote, that the language is now up on the screen.
Commissioner Lark?
No.
Commissioner Ballard?
No.
Commissioner Chatters?
Yes.
Commissioner Zelinski?
Yes?
Commissioner Yanasak?
Yes.
Commissioner Lavra?
Yes.
Chair Finch?
Yes, thank you.
That motion passed.
All right. I would like to propose an amendment to section 19.05.080 in Exhibit A. Proposed to remove the UR4 and the light industrial 1 and 2 from the permitted zones for an ADU.
Second.
We okay for a vote?
We are.
Commissioner Atkins?
Yes.
Commissioner Ballard?
Yes.
Commissioner Chatters?
Yes.
Commissioner Zelinski?
Yes.
Commissioner Yanasak?
Yes.
Commissioner Lavra?
Yes.
Chair Finch?
Yes. Thank you. Any, yes, Commissioner Zelinski.
Mr. Chair, I have two remaining concerns with the proposal as written. The first has to do with design standards, and I feel like I might be by myself on this one. But I am concerned that we've totally abandoned any design standards in this exercise of reviewing ADUs. I'm wondering if the staff has a response to Dave Koenig's comment about policy 4.5.3, which seems to specifically direct us to have some design standards.
Yeah, Mr. Koenig raises a good point on that. I would say that the two other words on either side of design, dimensional and locational, we clearly have incorporated into this proposal. Whether design standards are specifically addressed in the remainder of what would regulate an accessory dwelling unit would probably depend on whether you would look to other sections of code. So yes, we've stripped out design standards from specifically applying to accessory dwelling units. There are, I'm not sure. I'm not sure whether you would consider universally applicable urban design requirements that touch accessory dwelling units to fulfill that requirement. Steve, can you think of anything that is elsewhere in code that would apply to accessory dwelling units that would be considered a design standard? I'm thinking the porch stuff,
That applies to duplexes and
that would
such?
apply to an accessory dwelling unit.
Nothing specific, no.
Yeah. So that's something that we should look at to make sure that we're consistent with that policy. While we think about that a little bit, the contours of the discussion, I will say that I pressed that issue. I think we've mentioned design at each one of these meetings and had a couple discussions on it. We had a couple specific meetings on that with staff and looked at, I think it was at the last meeting of the Planning Commission, I suggested maybe there was something in, I think it was 1906 or 1908, where there are some design requirements for attached housing in single-family zones that would be appropriate here. And we went piece by piece, and there were challenges with each one of them. Some of them were around why, I'd say the one that trumped them all was, why would an accessory dwelling unit have design standards that a house or a garage would not? I think it's, I put in the back pocket here the picture that actually came from one of our commenters, not in the letter that came to the Planning Commission, but a separate letter she referenced that she sent to staff and the mayor about curb cuts. And that was one of those that we had a meeting this morning to talk about oh, shoot. We made some changes after this got incorporated up there. It was a development that was on an alley lot. There were two pre-existing houses that fronted on the alley that made it impractical to extend a driveway from the alley into the front street side. They were actually pre-zoning code houses. They were not accessory dwelling units. They were houses that have been there for decades. And this house had, now I have to describe it, but the house had like a barn roof. It was one of those with several different points to it. Or the new one. I said house, it's actually a garage with, I think, some habitable space above, but not permitted as an accessory dwelling unit. It looked very different than the house next to it. That was, because it's a garage, you can do it. It had different windows, it had a different pitch, it had a different color, it had a different width to height ratio. Debatable whether you could consider that a negative impact on the block or variety in the way that many of our blocks have a lot of different architectural styles to them. But either way, you could do it because it's a garage, but you couldn't do it if somebody's living there. You can do it if it's a new house, but you can't do it if it's an accessory dwelling unit. And so some of those kind of fairness and consistency were what sunk each time I probed in that area with staff. And some of the other ones were just not workable. What is it? How would you apply this? And what does something like quality design or something? So that was the contours of the discussion, and we tried multiple times to get something on design in there. I do think we're going to need to take a look at that policy and have a response for that. That's better than the one that I gave you. I'm pretty sure that there is something out there that could get us to technical compliance, and I think we're pretty close to the spirit. But it's a good point.
Well, I don't have a specific amendment to offer to address this, but as I think I suggested at our last discussion a couple weeks ago,
Yeah.
that trying to find a few features of the principal dwelling and reflecting that in the accessory unit then helps to establish the accessory nature of the unit as opposed to trying to comply with some kind of design idiom for the neighborhood or whatever. It's just the relationship of the principal with the accessory unit. My second source of concern is the 2 ADUs per principal dwelling. My fear is that without at least a restriction on whether they can be detached or not, we run the risk of creating what may appear to be a little cluster housing development as opposed to within a single-family district, which I think a lot of neighbors would construe as adversely affecting the character of their neighborhood. So in this case, I can offer an amendment language where we talk about the 2 ADUs, we just limit no more than 1 can be detached. So that if you do have 2, 1 would have to be attached and 1 would have to be detached. I think I could live with that. But on the design one, I don't have anything to offer. I think that needs a little work.
Is there a second to Commissioner Zelinski's proposal to limit the number of detached ADUs to 1?
I'll second it.
Okay, great, thank you.
Maybe before we vote, I guess I'd be curious, maybe hear from staff on that matter. I mean, I know moving to 2, I'm sure there was some discussion about how we got to that. I know what I saw in the comments here, and I haven't verified this independently, but they talked about how in other cities where they offer 2, that is the requirement. That I guess if I remember correctly, they suggesting that there aren't really any other cities in Washington anyway that allow 2. Is that, I don't know if that's accurate or?
I think Seattle does with their 3 year ago code amendments.
Okay. So I guess, I mean, was there discussion when staff was drafting this as a proposal, was there discussion about this? Or was there a reason that supporting landing at 2 as opposed to maybe, I guess kind of why I would say maybe a middle ground is kind of what Commissioner Zelinski was just talking about?
I think I could offer that there are enough other dimensional standards such as lot coverage and setbacks that the size of the lots that predominate the city, you probably would have a difficult time getting to detached units on a piece of property. So we we felt that that served as the guardrails for too many of those. It would have to be a large lot to get a couple of detached accessory dwelling units, was our discussion.
Yeah, I agree. The lot coverage limit is, what, 40%, I think, at most?
40% are to 35% RS, R1.
And so that's building footprint. That means no matter what the number is, if our number was 50, you still can't fit very many of these, or at least half of the lot has to be not covered with buildings. And other than that, it was looking for housing. Relatively small housing units, and that was the reason that we did not increase the lot coverage in some of those dimensional standards.
I just think there's such a desperate need for housing in this region. And rent is still going up. It's hard to find homes just to put a roof over your head. I came, last weekend, spent 4 days with my reserve unit doing cold weather training outside. It was absolutely unbearably miserable to be sleeping outside for night after night after night in the cold. And there are people out there who have to do that because we don't have enough homes. This isn't gonna fix it, but we gotta move the ball forward on it. And we have rules in place that prevent it from being from us putting too much, from us causing a problem by overpopulating the lot and causing drainage issues. But we need homes for folks, and we need different types of homes. Developers are gonna develop what makes the most sense to them financially, so it's gonna be to a certain standard. And with ADUs, we are opening up for more diversity in scope and size of housing, and housing not just for, to rent, but it's also housing for family members. And it's just, I think we can address a lot of the concerns with the existing rules, but outright saying no to the second one, we're taking opportunity off the table, opportunity for people to have a roof over their heads. So I really want to emphasize how important I think it is to have that second unit.
Please.
I just wanted to say that my thought before coming to the meeting today is that a lot of the worries that people have are going to be prevented by other requirements, the setbacks and the coverage and everything, and that, the feasibility for people to build something as well, and that probably it won't be as pervasive a use within the city as people fear, and probably not too many double detached units.
Any further discussion on this point? Commissioner Yanosek?
No.
Okay. I think we're ready for the vote, Kathy.
Is the motion just the 180 unit per?
I think that the motion is up to 2 ADUs so long as one is attached.
Okay. Commissioner Lark?
No.
Commissioner Ballard?
No.
Commissioner Chatters?
No.
Commissioner Zelinski?
Yes?
Commissioner Yanosek?
No.
Commissioner Lavra?
Yes.
Chair Finch?
No. Okay, any further proposed amendments?
Yes, I would like to offer an amendment to, in section 19.34.050, instead of is waived for properties within 1/2 mile walking distance, amending it to say is waived for properties within 1 mile walking distance.
I second that.
Any discussion? Somehow I knew we'd come back to parking.
I do, just to add on, again, to your point, it rains here all the time. I mean, it's also doesn't have to be a walking. I mean, as we're talking about, it's a 1/4 mile to the back of Safeway. a mile's not that far for young people getting back and forth, especially students going to the university, going to the hospital with these ADU units. In addition to that, they're using scooters, they're using bicycles, so it's just not, you know, it would take me, maybe I wouldn't do a mile, but, you know.
Just for a personal example, when I lived in Arlington, Virginia, my bus stop was like 0.8 miles from my house. It's really miserable there, 8 to 10 months out of the year too, whether you're just too hot and you're a pool of human water, or you're frozen because it gets just as cold out there. So, you know, and when I lived in Seoul, there's also, you could walk a far distance being just as miserable in a lot of other conditions. So I wish Commissioner Chair Finch, I wish we were San Diego. It'd be very pleasant, but I think we can survive and make the choice of how we, you know, our comfort level for walking.
Okay, I think we are ready for the vote, final vote on parking, I hope.
Commissioner Atkins,
Yes.
Commissioner Ballard,
Yes.
Commissioner Chatters,
Yes.
Commissioner Zelinski,
No.
Commissioner Yanasak,
No.
Commissioner Lavra,
Yes.
Chair Finch.
No. Passes. Okay, I actually do have one additional proposed amendment. This is to section 19.08, 100A8. And my proposal is to remove the fully detached qualifier from the sentence. It's not clear to me why design standards should be applied to ADUs that are only fully detached as opposed to semi-attached or attached.
Second.
Where are we again?
This is section 1908-100A8.
Historic overlays, page 2.
I second that.
Thank you.
To clarify, Chair, is it just dropping the word fully?
I would say that yeah, I think it's any ADU located within a historic overlay zone, whether it's attached or detached, it's in a historic overlay zone. And I can see greater design challenges coming from semi-attached than I can from fully detached.
We're gonna check real quick. There is a historic resources chapter that may interact with this, possibly to the extent of almost duplicating it. So we're gonna make sure that if we, subject to review. But go ahead in the meantime, we may have something to add.
Do we want to vote, or?
I think there's still some discussion.
Okay.
So would you consider amending it to just say that is fully or partially detached?
Yes, I would be, because I think if it's within the principal structure, I'm not concerned.
Correct.
But if it is
Partially.
partially attached or detached, then it should undergo design.
Okay. I would second that amendment in that form.
We've got 2 seconds, which we're
Oh.
on a good start here.
Thank you.
I think we're ready for a vote, Kathy.
Ready for a vote?
Sure.
And Mr. Chair, just to explain where we were looking at here. So in chapter 28, so this is the historic resources chapter, there's a list of actions subject to review by the Everett Historical Commission. And number 4 of that is construction of a detached accessory dwelling. I think we can proceed with this and it will do its thing. But just know that in the historic resources chapter, only detached accessory dwelling units require review by the Historical Commission. So if by removing fully detached from this, An attached accessory dwelling unit would need to comply with the design requirements and be reviewed. I guess we would suggest deleting the word detached from 1928-080 as well. I don't think you need to worry about that. We can catch that after the meeting.
Great.
Is that right? Becky says I got that right.
Excellent. If Becky says you
She
got it
didn't
right.
say I
then you
didn't
got it
get that right. I should
Okay,
clarify.
great.
Ready for a vote?
Please.
Just a question for staff. Are you saying that under the current regulations, an addition to an historic home is not subject to design review?
Additions over 150 square feet only, which is a substantial addition, but conversion, for instance, of a floor would not be,
Okay.
which
So
doesn't-
additions are, of any size, it is already covered, in other words.
That'd be separate from an ADU then?
Ready?
Would an addition, oh, I'm sorry. So would an addition, if an addition also be the same as an attached or a semi-attached
if you,
ADU, or would that be,
if you added on to a house and that was gonna be over 150 square feet for the purposes of an accessory dwelling unit, you would already be subject to review by the Historic Commission. If you converted a floor without adding more than 150 square feet, it would not. If you added a detached unit, it would.
The distinguishing part about being subject to review by the Historic Commission is if the addition is to a contributing structure. So that means that it would have to be a historically contributing structure which has its own criteria. So if it wasn't, and it was with this amendment that you're proposing, any addition for an ADU would require review. And I don't want to belabor this, but it's subject to design guidelines. And I don't know if the design guidelines would address that particular type of a use. So we're kind of in a we don't know.
Sounds like we're in a we don't know land.
Yeah.
I will say that based on the written public testimony, character of neighborhood is very important. And we've identified historic districts that we think have rich character. So it would be logical to require ADUs, whether fully detached or attached, so long as they're not entirely encapsulated within the principal structure, to undergo design review.
Yeah, I think that staff can work with the motion and that
Can
sounds
can you
reasonable.
restate the motion? Sorry, lost the motion.
You just asked the deletion of those.
Yeah, no, no, you're good, you're good. I myself have forgotten at this point. So I think what I'm saying is that any ADU that is fully detached, let me back up. Any ADU that is not entirely within the principal dwelling unit within a historic overlay zone must also comply with the design requirements of the historic overlay and be reviewed by the city's historical commission with a recommendation to the planning director. Does that sound? Great.
Second.
Okay,
3 seconds?
Yes.
so lots of seconds. So we ready for vote?
Sure feels like it.
Okay. Commissioner Lark,
Yes.
Commissioner Ballard,
Yes.
Commissioner Chatters? Yes. Commissioner Zelinski,
Yes?
Commissioner Yanasak?
Yes.
Commissioner Lavera,
Yes.
Chair Finch?
Yes. Okay, look how far we've come. Any additional proposed amendments?
I don't have an amendment, but I just want to say, Commissioner Zelinski, I don't think you're entirely alone in raising some issues about design standards. I mean, I will just say, I think it's a good point. I didn't think that Mr. Koenig raised some good points. I will just say for my part, I feel fairly satisfied with the discussion. This was something we had talked about pretty much at length. We'd heard from staff about this, and I feel comfortable moving forward without making any changes per se, but I just don't want you to think you're the only one. It is something I think we've thought about, and we have considered quite heavily, and so the comments are well taken and the concerns are there, but it's not going to change my position on that per se, but it is a good point to raise.
I agree. Thank you.
And if I could, thank you, Commissioner. I agree with you as well. I think this is something we wrestled with a lot. Obviously, design and you see the wording of the policies is important. I would encourage anybody who has an idea of specific language that would be workable, because we did try and we could not come up with something that would be workable. We still have a couple months left of this before the City Council. Staff would be happy to hear of it and will carefully consider that.
Just one quick question regarding the design standards. I mean, is it out of the realm of possibility or feasibility that, if a community or a neighborhood or a block is concerned about design standards, that they just incorporate into an HOA on that block and say, these are our design standards, there's a sufficient number of people here who are really concerned about this is what we want, and it's an organic grassroots thing for that particular neighborhood. It addresses what they want, addresses their concerns. We get an absolute buy-in because we know how many people, a majority of people in there have that opinion, and it's not the city being the HOA, it's letting people, for this who's an issue, address that issue. Is that a viable remedy?
That is possible, yes.
Chair Finch, I don't know if this has been done, but I would move adoption of Resolution 2204 as already amended today.
As amended, just to be clear, as amended by sections 19.34050, 19.04080, and 19.08.100A8. I think those were the three sections that we amended.
Yes, with those amendments.
Seconded.
Great, thank you.
Any discussion? Thank you. Kathy, please call.
Commissioner Atkins?
Aye.
Commissioner Ballard?
Yes.
Commissioner Chatters?
Yes.
Commissioner Zelinski?
In spite of my concerns, because I like the overall direction of this, I'm going to support it, but I'm going to take up the planning director's challenge, and I will work on some potential modification language to address the design standards issue. But yes.
Commissioner Yanasak?
Yes.
Commissioner Lavra?
I'm thinking that Commissioner McGinn might have something to say and help Commissioner Zelinski. Yes.
And Chair Finch?
Yes, thank you all for your great comments tonight. And staff, we talked about this before, but I do think that at some interval, it would be important to reevaluate how effective the new code is relative to ADUs. I don't know if that's 3 years out or 4 years out, given that it takes 9 to 12 months to get through the permitting process and construct it, but at some point, it would be good to do a look back and evaluation of this policy.
Absolutely. Good idea.
Can I just mention one more quick thing? And this is just kind of an anecdote. I remember when the EMP building, if you all know what that is in Seattle, when that was built, I remember there was a lot of outrage about how ugly it was, how out of step it was with what architecture should look like. And so there are, sensibilities about these things that change over time. And so I think this is a really good step that we're putting forward these options for folks. But it's interesting because that's kind of a gem now. It's seen as really unique and really a point for folks visiting the area to be sure and see this unique building. So anyhow, thank you.
Commissioner Chatters' challenge to the architects out there to design some ADUs that will bring people to come visit just to see them. Okay, we're getting late in the evening, so I think we'll go through this fairly quickly, but we wanted to touch on the comprehensive plan. I think this is going to open up this next year of significant work on the comprehensive plan. This is a topic that's near and dear to our hearts, and I believe yours as well. Effective, equitable, and thoughtful public participation strategy. We've been doing some work on our public participation plan. Alberto Vasquez is here to take us through where we're at with our planning for our approach to engagement over the next 2 years of the comprehensive plan update project. Alberto.
Well, good evening, Commissioners. Yeah, I'll just start us off. I'll give you a little refresher background here. As you know, we're getting ready to embark on planning for another planning horizon, which will be the 2024 to 2044, that's hard to say, horizon. And it's very important that we have a very effective public participation, both from a functional standpoint of our work and for the public, and that it's meaningful for them, that they feel like they've been heard. This is a requirement, although we want to do this anyway. We want to hear from the community. So this is where we're going to engage with citizens, stakeholders, the marginalized community members, interested parties, definitely our partner agencies across our very diverse geographic in Everett. And so there's the RCW that requires it, but as I said, we're excited to engage with the community. So we set out some goals for what we want to accomplish in our public participation plan. Want to make sure that we're promoting sustainable decisions by recognizing and communicating the needs and interests of the community. So what we hear, we're bringing back to decision makers. That we collect our community feedback, and that helps us to create and adjust the work that we're doing and our growth alternatives, so helping us form and shape those growth alternatives. And then not only do we want to engage with them in this process, but we want to build long-term, lasting relationships that help us over time. We want them to participate in, the interim stuff like these code amendments that we've been working on. We think that's very important. So you may recall that we have these 5 stages. We've been in kind of the stage 1 this last year, and we are kind of labeling our next phase, which is in between 1 and 2. We call it 1.5. Since we didn't get a lot of engagement during that first scoping part, we're going to do a little more outreach to try and capture some. It isn't going to be the technical scoping, but we're going to use it to, one, talk a little bit more with the community about the vision and what should we focus our efforts on. So fortunately, we were able to get a grant from Washington State Department of Commerce, and that is allowing us to hire an engagement coordinator, community engagement coordinator. I'm trying to remember the title. And we're very pleased to have Alberto working with us today, and we're pleased that he could come here and share with you what some of his plans are. You have that, yeah. So with that, I will turn it over to Alberto. Thank you.
Thanks, Becky. Good afternoon, Planning Commission. As Becky mentioned, our goals within the comprehensive plan is to really get community feedback that will help us build Everett for the next 20 years. Part of that is to get public participation and really hear the stories of our Everett residents. Through the phases, I designed the focus to kind of ask questions from every citizen from the areas of Everett. Everybody, of course, as you know, has different opinions, from ADA units, parking, as we have heard tonight. And some of those questions are, what do you like about Everett and your neighborhood? What makes Everett and your neighborhood unique? What is not working about Everett and your neighborhood? What changes would you like to see? And how and where should the city accommodate and encourage housing and growth? Our target audience is really Everett, but our diverse communities are, of course, broken down to historical marginalized communities. This includes disabled communities, seniors, LGBTQ+, minorities. We're also looking to continue working and expand our collaboration with neighborhood associations. We would attend a couple meetings with them to start talking about some of the projects that are happening in their neighborhoods. Hear back, is that the correct plan? What else do you have to give us, as far as transportation, parks? And of course, we want to reach out to our seniors and our youth. We want to hear and learn our historic, what has worked in the past, what's working right now, and what is our youth in the future, what is it asking for. We will collaborate with community organizations. Of course, the Rotary Club is one of them. And through the process, we'll probably be learning and meeting new community organizations that will help us reach out to the neighborhoods in Everett. And of course, our other target audience is city boards and commissions, partner agencies, social services, small business community, large employers, and developers. And some of the methods and tools, this is really composed of some of the early conversations that I've personally had with some of the community members and that I chatted with. Of course, the first one is build an interest party list. So people that want to learn more, they want to be involved within, the project. They want to, perhaps help us out a little bit and get the word out of, what the comprehensive plan is and how they can get their input. Build a mailing list, a newsletter to sign up so people are in the know whenever we are hosting events or whenever we're present at an event. Of course, collecting surveys similar to the questions that we showed earlier. What do they think about their community? What do they like? What do they don't like? Collect comments, positive, negative. We'll use local media to kind of, get the word out that, these meetings are happening and we're gonna be out in our community chatting, looking for people to talk to. We always start producing handouts and printed materials. That's a unique one because we actually started producing them both in English and Spanish, and we're gonna start producing that in other languages as demand. We will be updating our website and using social media, so working with our communications team to get the word out again, to let people know, like, hey, give us a little feedback, scan this QR code, or click this link and let us know what you're thinking, about your neighborhood today. One of the first events that we're looking to host is an open house. We will be hosting an open house on December 17th. We started advertising that and started having some community outreach through the winter tide events that are happening around the city. We were at the farmers market this past weekend. We will be at the village winter tide on December 9th. And of course, that's part of the community pop-up events, and of course, coming in to talk to the planning commission, the city council, continue attending neighborhood association and boards meetings, online chat hours. That's a new one that we kind of would like to play with, and perhaps getting a little feedback from you guys. I know that there's a lot of community members that perhaps don't have the time to come, so maybe make some time online so they can come in and do kind of a drop-in session, where they can just kind of chat with anybody and just have a casual conversations of like, hey, I saw that you guys are planning to put ADA units, or I saw that Everett Transit's gonna extend their bus routes. Can you tell me a little bit more about that? And of course, the environmental review process. So these are some of the early and some of the already ongoing processes that we're doing for outreach.
So maybe go back one slide, yeah.
Yeah, sorry.
And we wanted to pause here. And
That's right, sorry. And
We
then
wanted to
here's
pause
where
here.
we would like to kind of ask if the online chat one, if you guys think that might be if you guys will probably use it, if you guys know of like community members that might be interested in. I know that some, it depends. Some of the community members that I've chatted with, some of them do have internet access, others don't. So we'd like to hear some feedback if we're in the right direction.
I think it's the online chat's great, I think. No one method of outreach is going to create access to every community. So this is a really good tool and an alternative tool. I applaud it.
I also think the online chat hours are a good thing. We used them during the Rethink Housing process, and I thought they were successful in getting some public feedback.
I'm supportive of that. I had a question, or not a question, but my big concern, or a concern, is the outreach to the marginalized but lower income apartments, or not even low income, just working people that don't have capacity to come to meetings. And I think asking surveys and questions are great, and I'm not saying don't do that, but I think I don't think they understand what they can even ask for, right? I mean, they don't understand that without parking, parking, if we reduce parking, maybe they could afford to be in an ADU in a neighborhood with a better school. I don't think they understand that's even a possibility. So if they, how do you, how do you do a survey, but you almost have to educate them so they know what they can ask and then, do the survey maybe, or something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was part of the outreach process. A lot of it does have to do with education. Some of the community members that I've already chatted with, representatives and some just regular citizens, it is part of that, just chatting with them, even, I know the ADUs has been a topic tonight, explaining what an ADU unit is. There's a lot of low-income people who some do know and some don't. As you guys know, or you guys might have heard, our city is getting a pretty growth, substantial refugees and people who are immigrating from different parts of the world. And some of them are coming in here and they're familiar with it, but not fully familiar, or they don't have an idea of what it looks like. So our goal has also been to take pictures of existing 80 units in Everett to kind of put them in the slideshows, PowerPoint, so they can actually see what it looks like and potentially, show them like this is what an 88 fourplex could look like. Would you like that in your neighborhood? Yes or no?
Please.
I agree with what Commissioner Ballard said, and I think when we talk about marginalized groups, there's context to that, and so we have, traditional ways of thinking about what the word marginalized means, but in the context of historically contributing to planning efforts, renters are a marginalized group. And so is there a specific strategy to show up to where renters are, rather than just holding forums that renters may not typically come to because historically they have not been included in these processes, so they may not even think to show up to these meetings because they might think, oh, our voices are not welcome, but they do make up the majority of the city, although in this context, they are a marginalized group.
Yes, so that's one of the efforts that we had. So when we started planning of how to outreach to people, you're absolutely right. We can have an open house in north of Everett. Our first open house will be hosted in the Evergreen Library. We will go to, I identified areas where people go who are marginalized, low income. They kind of visit. So one of the first areas that I identified as helping people with rents is the Village down in Casino Road. A lot of people connect with the local organization, Connect Casino Road. They get a lot of assistance, both financially, rental, translating, anything. It can range from a lot of things. We are looking to kind of start, collaborating with these organizations to see, what are you creating? What kind of events do you have? How can we help you? How can we be part of that? So we can actually reach out to the community and learn from that community, like, what's the best way to communicate with you? How can I get your feedback? Whether it's just attending this event and just collecting data and comments through that event, or letting them know, like, hey, if we host an event down in Evergreen Library, would you be able to attend? What kind of assistance can we help you so you can attend? Because we want to hear from them and let them know that their comments are useful, because we'll be sharing them with you guys when we do get them.
Thank you. Oh, I'm sorry. I was going to say, that is so important what you're saying. Thank you for that. I think that is a really good framework, but I also want you to maybe expand your framework a bit, because all renters are not low income. There are a lot of folks who are just working people who are renters, and so there should be a deliberate effort to reach those folks as well, and not have the assumption that reaching out to low income folks that's the way to reach renters, because that is not accurate. Thank you.
Commissioner Chatters, do you have a suggestion on
I
how we
do,
might
actually.
do that?
A lot of large apartment complexes, they have common spaces. And so perhaps reaching out to some of these large apartment complexes and seeing if an outreach session can be held in some of their common spaces.
Thank you.
Good suggestion. And I agree
Piggybacking
with-
off of the excellent suggestion of Commissioner Chatters, also a lot of these apartment complexes, when I lived in some of them in downtown Everett, they had online virtual forums. And so for those apartment complexes, you're more likely to have people with internet. And you could probably hit the online chat that way and put it in that virtual form, because sometimes it's harder to get into the commons room or even see your poster in the common space as well. So, but the online apps that support the units would also be a valuable way forward too.
Anything? I would just wanted to support Commissioner Ballard's comments. I do think it's important to provide some guidance as to the kinds of questions that can be asked and answered. And I think it's important to also provide things to respond to. Sometimes people do better at responding to questions asked of them as opposed to giving feedback, whether solicited or not. Also, I would say that sometimes it's important to also evaluate the perspective from which people are coming from as they give you feedback. And I don't know how you do that. I'm not a social scientist, but there's a lot of science around this. And so the questions that are being asked and how they're being asked in some ways drives to a certain outcome. And just be very aware of the bias that's inherent in how certain things are asked.
Just a comment from me. While doing your outreach, please don't forget about the urban Indian community. Commonly, outreach to Native Americans is just done with tribes, and there over half of Native Americans in this country are urban Indians like myself that do not live near a reservation, and just would love to see some outreach, and would love to talk offline about and brainstorm about some ideas on how we could conduct that outreach.
This is great feedback. Thank you.
Yep, sorry, thanks. Probably can go through this pretty quickly, but again, these are the phases. We're in the phase 1.5, where we're going to go back out, get some more, try to get some more initial feedback that we weren't able to really get during, earlier in the year. And then we're going to transition into phase 2 probably in February, although we have been working internally on the draft growth alternatives. We'll continue to see in this phase 1.5 what's working, what's not. Phase 3 will be really honing in on the draft alternatives after we say, did we get this right? And then move into evaluating the environmental impacts. Then we're going to have a draft updated comprehensive plan for folks to respond to. Hopefully we'll have the preferred alternative, which we expect will be a hybrid of some of the more extreme alternatives that we put out there. And finally, get into the adoption process, and we'll be working with you as that comes up as to how best to move forward through your process and on to City Council.
Any questions?
Very quickly, just to note, this planning commission did adopt a resolution back in 2020 addressing outreach for communities that have been traditionally marginalized. I would just say, take a look at that. Take a look at that resolution that was passed. Make sure you guys are hitting the marks. I think no doubt there is. I just wanted to make sure that the work that we've done doesn't, pre-COVID didn't fall to the wayside.
It's actually in our housing action plan, so we'll make sure we are taking a look at that. Thank you.
Thank you for the presentation and your hard work. Meeting is adjourned.